Nathaniel Johnson was 37 years old, earned $64,000 a year as a civilian aircraft mechanic at Naval Air Station Pensacola, and on a sun-drenched Saturday afternoon at precisely 3:14 p.m., the life he thought he was building came to a dead stop. The air in the flower shop, a place he had paid for with 3 years of his life, was thick with the cloying sweetness of lilies and the bitter acid of betrayal. His wife, Ashanti, stood beside her mother, her arms crossed, her beautiful face a mask of disappointment. It was his mother-in-law, Glenda, who delivered the final, devastating blow. Her elegant locks, which he'd paid for at a $250 a salon, seemed to bristle with indignation. Her hands, usually busy arranging $10 stems of delphinium into $60 bouquets, were planted firmly on her hips. Her voice, normally smooth as silk when charming customers, was sharp as broken glass. "This is my business. You are a guest here," she spat, her eyes burning with a cold fire he had never seen before. "Get out of my shop. Don't come back." For a moment, Nathan couldn't process the words. My shop. The two words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence. He looked from Glenda's furious face to Ashanti's. His wife of 5 years simply stared back at him, her expression unreadable but offering no comfort, no defense. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, siding with her mother. In that instant, Nathan wasn't a partner, a husband, the silent financial engine that made this whole beautiful illusion possible. He was an inconvenience, an outsider. He had just come from a 12-hour shift, the smell of hydraulic fluid and jet fuel still faint on his clothes underneath his clean Saturday polo. His hands, though scrubbed raw, still held the phantom feeling of steel and wiring. He had wanted to talk, to understand why a $5,000 upfront payment for a new vase supplier was suddenly a do-or-die emergency. He had simply suggested they discuss the large, unplanned expense that evening at home. And that suggestion had detonated his world. He had no idea what was coming, but he was about to find out just how deep the betrayal went, and how much they underestimated the quiet, methodical man who fixed the machines that broke the sound barrier. Have you ever poured your heart and soul into something, only to be told you were never even a part of it? It's a pain that goes deeper than money. Let us know in the comments if you've ever felt that kind of sting, and keep watching to see how a man of precision and patience applies those skills not to an engine, but to justice. The foundation of petals and promises, Glenda's dream shop in the charming East Hill neighborhood of Pensacola, was laid 3 years earlier, not with mortar and bricks, but with Nathan's quiet sacrifice. He remembered the conversation as if it were yesterday. It was a Tuesday evening in their cozy 3-bedroom home in Cordova Park, a house he was immensely proud of. With a mortgage payment of $1,980 a month that he never missed. Ashanti had made his favorite meal, shrimp and grits. She'd lit a $40 Joe Malone candle and put on a playlist of his favorite old-school R&B. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign. "Baby," she had begun, her hand resting on his forearm, her deep brown eyes luminous in the soft light. "You know Mama has always dreamed of having her own flower shop." Nathan nodded. Glenda had worked for other florists for 20 years. She was talented, he knew that. She had a genuine artist's eye. "She's amazing at it," he agreed, taking a bite of grits. "She found the perfect spot," Ashanti continued, her voice filled with excitement. "It's on 12th Avenue. The rent is a little high, $4,500 a month, but the foot traffic is incredible. She's worked out a whole business plan. But the bank? You know how they are. They want a huge down payment for a business loan, and her credit is, well, it's not great." Nathan listened, his mechanic's mind already calculating, seeing the problem from all angles. He knew Glenda's financial history was spotty, a failed catering business 10 years ago, a mountain of credit card debt she'd only recently consolidated. "She just needs a little help to get started," Ashanti said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "An investor. Someone who believes in her." She looked at him, her gaze intense. "Someone who believes in us." He saw where this was going. He had savings. Nearly $20,000 set aside, the result of years of careful budgeting and picking up extra shifts at the NAS. It was their emergency fund, their future house down payment fund. "Ashanti, that's a lot of money," he said gently. "And a flower shop is a tough business." "But it's her dream," she insisted, a slight tremor in her voice. "And it wouldn't just be her dream, it would be ours. An asset for our family. Think about it, Nathan. She runs it, and we're the owners. It's an investment that will pay us back for years to come. An asset for our family." That was the phrase that hooked him. He wasn't just giving his mother-in-law a handout. He was building a future with his wife. He loved Ashanti, loved the way she made their house a home, loved her ambition. He wanted to support her, and by extension, her mother. "I'd have to take on more overtime," he thought aloud. "The regular salary won't cover the rent and our mortgage." His $64,000 salary was solid, dependable, but not extravagant. It paid for their 2018 Honda CR-V, their mortgage, their life. It didn't have an extra $4,000 or $5,000 of slack in it every month. "Just for a little while," Ashanti promised, squeezing his hand. "Just until the shop gets on its feet. A year, maybe 18 months. Then it will be paying for itself. More than paying for itself. Mama says within 2 years, we could be pulling in 6 figures. He looked at his wife, at the hope shining in her eyes. He wanted to be the man who could give her and her family this. He wanted to be the hero. So, against the quiet, cautious voice in the back of his mind, he said yes. The next week, he transferred $15,000 from his savings account to a new business account Glenda had opened under the name Glenda's Bloom, LLC. He never asked to have his name on the paperwork. He trusted them. It was, after all, an asset for their family. That was his first and most critical mistake. The first year was a blur of long hours and quiet sacrifice. Nathan volunteered for every extra shift, every weekend rotation, every holiday duty he could get his hands on. He worked on the Navy's fleet of T-45 Goshawk training jets, his days filled with the high-pitched whine of turbines and the precise, methodical work of ensuring flight safety. He'd come home, his body aching, the smell of grease ground into the skin of his hands, and find Ashanti scrolling through pictures of the shop's progress on her phone. "Look, baby, the new coolers are in," she'd say, showing him a picture of the $8,000 floral refrigeration unit he'd just paid for. "They look so professional." He'd smile and nod, too tired to do much else. He'd eat the dinner she'd saved for him, watch an hour of television, and fall into bed, only to wake up at 5 a.m. to do it all over again. On the first of every month, like clockwork, he'd initiate a transfer of $4,500 from his checking account to Glenda's LLC. Then there were the other costs. The initial inventory of flowers from a wholesaler in Miami, $3,200. The custom-printed aprons and gift cards, $750. The point-of-sale system, a $1,200 initial cost, and a $79 monthly fee. Each expense was presented to him by Ashanti as a critical business need. And each time he paid. He rarely went to the shop in those early days. It was their project, and he was the silent, invisible partner. He felt a quiet pride when he drove past and saw the lights on, the beautiful arrangements in the window. He was building something. The facade of domestic normalcy was maintained with meticulous care. On the surface, they were a happy, Successful young black couple in Pensacola. He, the steady, hard-working husband with a respectable government job. She, the stylish, supportive wife of a burgeoning family business. But beneath the surface, a subtle poison was beginning to seep into the foundations of their marriage. The money, which was supposed to be a bridge, was becoming a wall. He started noticing small things. Ashanti's wardrobe began to change. The clothes from Target and Old Navy were replaced by dresses from boutiques in downtown Pensacola, dresses with price tags of $300 or $400. When he gently questioned a $450 charge from a local high-end store, she was ready with an answer. "The shop had a fantastic week," she'd say brightly, pulling a flowing, floral print dress from the bag. "We did 3 weddings. Mama said I should get myself something nice. It's good for the brand, you know, to look the part." He wanted to believe her, but he knew he had transferred an extra $2,000 just last week to cover payroll because, as Ashanti had explained, cash flow is just a little tight this month. The shop wasn't having a fantastic week. He was. He was having a fantastic week of overtime. But he said nothing. He didn't want to be the guy who questioned every purchase, the guy who held the finances over her head. He had promised to support this dream, and this, apparently, was part of the cost. The disconnect grew wider, more painful. The accumulation of outrage was a slow, steady process, a death by 1,000 cuts. It happened at family dinners, in public, and in the quiet of their own home. One Sunday they were at Glenda's apartment for dinner. Her place was small, but she filled it with expensive-looking things: silk pillows, art books, and of course, extravagant floral arrangements from the shop. Her brother, Uncle Robert, a retired Army sergeant, was there. He was a man Nathan respected, a man who understood the world of discipline and mechanics. "So, Nate," Uncle Robert said, his voice a low rumble, "I hear they got the new F-35 simulators down at the base. You getting any time on those systems? That avionics package is a whole different beast." Nathan's eyes lit up. This was his world. "It's unbelievable," he started, leaning forward. "The level of integration, the sensor fusion. It's a generational leap. The diagnostics alone are—" He was cut off by Glenda's light, dismissive laugh. "Oh, Robert, please don't get him started on his noisy planes and greasy tools," she said, waving a hand adorned with a new, sparkling ring. "We're trying to have a sophisticated evening here. Let's talk about the arts." Ashanti, sitting next to him, giggled in agreement. "Mama's right. Nobody wants to hear about widgets and wires, baby." The table went quiet for a beat. Nathan felt his face flush with heat. It was a public dismissal, a casual castration. His work, the difficult, essential labor that paid for the very food on their plates and the roof over Glenda's head, was reduced to noisy planes and greasy tools. He looked at Ashanti, hoping for a lifeline, a small glance of solidarity. She just smiled at her mother and took a delicate sip of her 60-a-bottle wine. He felt utterly alone. The shrimp and grits in his stomach turned to lead. He spent the rest of the dinner in silence, the outrage simmering just below the surface. Then came the magazine article. It was the 2-year anniversary of the shop's opening, and Petals and Promises was a recognized name in East Hill. It was beautiful, successful on the outside, a testament to Glenda's talent and Ashanti's modern marketing savvy, and of course a testament to Nathan's seemingly bottomless bank account. A local lifestyle magazine, Pensacola Life, decided to do a feature. Nathan came home one evening to find the magazine lying open on their solid oak coffee table, a $1,500 piece from a local artisan that he had paid for as a housewarming gift to themselves. The headline was spread across 2 glossy pages, over a professionally shot photo of Glenda and Ashanti standing proudly in the shop, surrounded by buckets of vibrant flowers. Their skin was glowing. Their smiles were radiant. They looked like queens in their floral kingdom. East Hill's blooming success, the mother-daughter duo behind petals and promises. He read the article, his heart sinking with every word. It was a fawning piece about Glenda's lifelong dream, her artistic vision, her courage in launching a business in her 50s. It praised Ashanti's social media skills, her keen business instincts that brought in a younger clientele. The article mentioned their struggles, their perseverance, their deep family bond. It painted a picture of two strong, independent Black women who had built a beloved community institution from the ground up, all by themselves. His name was not mentioned, not once. Not as an investor, not as a partner, not even as a supportive husband. He was erased from his own story. He was still staring at the article when Ashanti walked in, humming. "Oh, you saw it. Isn't it fabulous?" she asked, her face alight. "It's a great article," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "They didn't mention me." She waved a dismissive hand, the same gesture her mother used. "Oh, honey, that was a marketing decision. Self-made mother-daughter team is a much better story. It's more inspiring. You get that, right? It's just for the brand." "The brand," he repeated, the words tasting like ash. "The brand that I've put over $100,000 into." Her smile tightened. "Nathan, don't be like that. Don't be so transactional. We're a family. What's yours is ours. This success is your success too." But it wasn't. He saw that now. His success was invisible. He was the foundation, buried deep underground, and they were the beautiful structure everyone admired, acting as if they were floating on air. He felt a profound sense of foolishness, of shame. He had allowed this to happen. He had signed up to be a silent partner, and they had taken that silence and twisted it into non-existence. The outrage was no longer simmering. It was beginning to boil. The demands became more frequent, less polite. He was no longer a partner being consulted. He was a utility being used. A text message would arrive in the middle of his workday. "Need $1,800 for the rose shipment from Ecuador, ASAP." Or a call from Glenda on a Sunday morning. Not from Ashanti, but directly from Glenda, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Nathan, Holland Flowers, needs their $2,800 payment by 5 o'clock today. Or they're cutting off our account. Did you forget?" "I didn't forget, Glenda," he said, trying to keep his voice even. "Ashanti and I hadn't discussed it. Today is Sunday." "The business doesn't take weekends off," she snapped. "I can't be expected to handle the creative side and chase down the money. Just handle it." And she hung up. Chase down the money. He was something to be chased. He wasn't a person. He was an account payable. Each of these moments was a stone, and they were piling up on his chest, making it harder and harder to breathe. He was being crushed under the weight of their dream. He just didn't know that the final, heaviest stone was about to be dropped. That Saturday began like any other. Nathan finished his shift at 2:30 p.m., the familiar satisfaction of a job well done settling over him. He had spent the day troubleshooting a recurring glitch in the fuel flow sensor of a Blue Angels FA-18 Hornet. It was complex, meticulous work that required absolute focus, and he was good at it. He loved the certainty of it. A problem had a cause, and the cause could be found and fixed. There was a logic to it, a fairness. He changed out of his work-issued overalls, washed his hands until they were pink, and got into his 2015 Ford F-150, a truck he'd bought used for $22,000 and maintained himself. He decided to swing by the shop. Ashanti had texted him earlier, "Bring us some lunch? We're swamped." He stopped at a local deli and picked up 3 of their favorite turkey clubs at $12.99 each and 3 iced teas, a small act of service, a husbandly thing to do. He walked into Petals and Promises at 3:05 p.m. The bell on the door chimed its cheerful little tune. The shop was, as Ashanti had said, busy. 2 customers were waiting, and Glenda was behind the counter, her fingers flying as she wrapped a massive bouquet of sunflowers and lavender. Ashanti was on the phone, no doubt taking another order. The place looked stunning. Buckets of fresh-cut hydrangeas, roses, and eucalyptus filled the air with a fragrant, earthy perfume. It was a cathedral of flowers built on his back. He set the bag of sandwiches on a small work table in the back, out of the way. "Lunch is here," he said quietly. Ashanti gave him a quick, distracted smile and a thumbs up. Glenda didn't look up. After the customers left, the atmosphere shifted. The cheerful energy evaporated, replaced by a tense silence. "We need to talk," Glenda said, finally acknowledging him. She was wiping down the counter with a cloth, her movements sharp and angry. "Okay," Nathan said, leaning against the doorframe of the back room. "What's up?" "This new vase supplier," Glenda started, not looking at him. "The one from Italy. They make beautiful hand-blown glass. It would really elevate our premium arrangements, but they require a $5,000 deposit to open an account." Ashanti chimed in, having finished her call. "They're amazing, Nathan. We could charge an extra $50 per arrangement with these vases. It's a no-brainer." Nathan's internal calculator was already running. $5,000 was not an insignificant sum, especially when it wasn't planned. He had just paid the shop's monthly rent 2 weeks ago. He had just covered a $300 bill for new ribbons. "Okay," he said slowly, choosing his words with care. "It sounds interesting, but $5,000 is a lot to pull out right now without any planning. Can we talk about this tonight? We can look at the budget and see where it fits." This was, to him, a perfectly reasonable suggestion, a partner's suggestion. But to Glenda, it was an act of defiance. She slammed the cleaning cloth down on the counter. "Talk about what?" she snapped, her voice rising. "It's a business expense. It's an opportunity. And it's not going to wait for you to look at the budget. The time to act is now. Either you're in or you're out, Nathan." The ultimatum hung in the air, smelling more pungent than the lilies. He looked at Ashanti, expecting her to mediate, to soften her mother's harsh words. Instead, she doubled down. "Mama's right," Ashanti said, crossing her arms. Her expression was hard. "Why are you making this so difficult? It's for the shop. It's for us. Just send the money." Something inside Nathan, something that had been compressed for 3 long years, finally pushed back. The outrage so long suppressed found its voice. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, cold, and heavy, with the weight of thousands of hours of overtime. "I have put $180,000 into this business expense," he said, his voice flat and even. He hadn't even realized he knew the number so precisely, but it was there, seared into his memory. Every rent payment, every supplier invoice, every emergency cash infusion. Glenda's face, which had been red with anger, went pale with a different kind of fury. It was the fury of someone whose carefully constructed narrative had just been punctured by a cold, hard fact. She took a step toward him, her eyes narrowing. The air crackled. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "How dare you stand in my shop and throw money in my face? This is not about your money. This is about my vision, my talent, my work." She took another step, her finger now pointing at his chest. "You think you own this place because you write checks? You are nothing but the money. This," she said, sweeping her arm to encompass the entire beautiful, expensive shop, "is mine. I built this." The lie was so audacious, so complete, that Nathan could only stare. The sandwiches he had brought sat uneaten on the table, a pathetic symbol of his last, failed attempt to be part of the family. "This is my business," Glenda repeated, her voice rising to a sharp crescendo. "You are a guest here. Get out of my shop. Don't come back." He looked at Ashanti one last time. Her face was a stony mask. She nodded. Agreement, finality. He didn't say another word. There was nothing left to say. The logic was clear. A problem had a cause. He had found it. He turned around, the little bell on the door chiming mockingly as he walked out into the bright afternoon sun. He left the sandwiches, the lilies, the lies, and the last 3 years of his life behind him in that shop. He got into his Ford F-150, the engine rumbling to life with a familiar, comforting reliability. He sat in the driver's seat for a full 10 minutes, the sounds of 12th Avenue fading into a dull roar. He didn't feel rage. He didn't feel sorrow. He felt a profound, chilling clarity. A circuit had been broken. A system had failed. And now it was time to fix it. The drive home to Cordova Park was silent. Nathan didn't turn on the radio. He just drove, his hand steady on the steering wheel of his truck. The familiar route, past parks and tree-lined streets, felt alien. He was seeing it all through a new, sharply focused lens. He pulled into the driveway of the house, their house, he corrected himself mentally, and switched off the engine. The silence that followed was absolute. He sat there, looking at the neatly manicured lawn and the welcoming front door, and felt nothing. The warmth he usually felt coming home was gone, replaced by a cold, empty space. He went inside and walked through the quiet rooms. He saw everything with a price tag attached. The $1,500 oak coffee table where the magazine had lain, the $3,000 leather sofa they had picked out together, the $800 custom blinds in the living room. He had paid for it all, believing he was building a life. Now it just looked like an inventory of his own foolishness. He went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and sat down at the table. He didn't know what to do next. The shock was beginning to wear off, replaced by a slow-moving, glacial anger. But it wasn't a hot anger that demanded to be shouted. It was cold and methodical. It was the anger of an engineer who sees a catastrophic system failure and begins, calmly, to diagnose the root cause. He knew he had to play dumb, to act normal until he had a plan. He had to gather his evidence. Ashanti came home hours later, just after 8 p.m. She breezed in, dropping her $4,200 Louis Vuitton purse on the granite countertop, a countertop he had paid $4,000 to have installed. She was expecting a fight. He could see it in the way she held herself, her shoulders tense, her chin high. She was ready for tears, for yelling, for a dramatic confrontation where she could play the part of the wounded wife whose husband just didn't understand her family's dream. "Are you still sulking?" she asked, her tone a mixture of annoyance and condescension. She opened the refrigerator and took out a bottle of sparkling water. Nathan looked up from the table. He hadn't moved in an hour. His face was a blank canvas. "I'm tired," he said, his voice flat. His lack of reaction threw her off. This wasn't in the script. "Tired? Nathan, my mother is hysterical. You deeply insulted her today. You brought up money of all things. In her own shop. She told me to get out and not come back," he stated, not as an accusation but as a simple fact, a data point. "Well, what did you expect?" Ashanti shot back, her voice rising. "You were questioning her vision. After everything she's done, everything we've built." There it was, again. We. A word that no longer included him. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching a scene from a movie. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just nodded slowly. "You're right," he said. "I'm sorry. I was out of line." The lie felt slick and easy on his tongue. It was a strategic retreat. Ashanti was visibly taken aback by his sudden capitulation. She had been gearing up for a battle, and he had just surrendered unconditionally. "Oh," she said, her anger deflating into confusion. "Well, okay, good. I'm glad you see that. You need to call Mama and apologize." "I will," he lied again. "I'll do it tomorrow. I just need some sleep." He stood up, walked past her without meeting her eyes, and went into their bedroom. He closed the door, and for the first time it felt like he was closing a door on her, on them. He didn't get into the bed they shared. He grabbed a pillow and a blanket from the closet and went into the spare bedroom. He lay down on the queen-sized bed that was usually reserved for guests and stared at the ceiling. The playing dumb had begun. He feigned ignorance. He feigned remorse. But inside, a plan was beginning to form. A cold, quiet, and devastatingly precise plan. Sunday morning arrived with the pale, hazy light of a Florida dawn. At 5:47 a.m., while Ashanti slept soundly in their master bedroom, Nathan was wide awake in his small home office. The room was his sanctuary, a space filled with technical manuals, schematics, and the tools of his trade. It was a place of order and logic. Today it would become his war room. He sat down in his simple $150 office chair, powered on his 3-year-old Dell desktop computer, and took a deep breath. The quiet hum of the machine was a comforting sound. He opened his web browser and navigated to his online banking portal. The time for emotion was over. It was time for data. He began the tedious but necessary process of compiling his evidence. He set the transaction history filter to go back exactly 36 months. Page by page, month by month, he scrolled through his financial life. Every paycheck from the Department of the Navy, every mortgage payment, every grocery bill, and there, woven into the fabric of his life, was the steady, relentless bleed of money to Glenda's Bloom LLC. With a grim sense of purpose, he started exporting the monthly statements as PDF files. January, 3 years ago. February, March. The stack of digital files on his desktop grew. When he was done, he had 36 separate documents, a complete record of his sacrifice. Then, he began to print. The cheap Canon printer on the corner of his desk whirred to life, spitting out page after page. The stack of warm paper grew in the output tray. It took nearly 45 minutes. When it was finished, he had a physical stack of documents nearly 2 inches thick. It was the story of the last 3 years of his life, told in black and white. He took a yellow highlighter from a cup on his desk. He opened the first statement, and he began to audit his own life. The first entry he highlighted was the initial investment, $15,000, SARS, transferred to Glenda's Bloom LLC. That was from his savings, the seed of his own destruction. Then came the relentless rhythm of the monthly rent. He found the first one, $4,500. Transfer to Glenda's Bloom LLC. He highlighted it. He turned the page to the next month's statement. There it was again, and again, and again, 36 times. He did the math on a small calculator. $4,500 times 36 months. $162,000. He wrote the number down on a clean legal pad. But that was just the rent. He kept going, his eyes scanning for the other transfers. They were sporadic, inconsistent, but always present. $3,200 hours and transferred to Glenda's Bloom LLC. That was the initial flower inventory. $8,000 ounce transferred to Glenda's Bloom LLC. The floral coolers. $1,300 transferred to Glenda's Bloom LLC. Payroll shortage year 1. $2,800 NAS transferred to Glenda's Bloom LLC. The unpaid bill to the Dutch supplier. $750 transferred to Glenda's Bloom LLC. The aprons. $200 transferred to Glenda's Bloom LLC. The point of sale system, on and on it went. a litany of expenses, a river of his hard-earned money flowing into their dream. He highlighted every single one. His hands started to ache. When he finally reached the last statement from the previous month, he leaned back in his chair, the yellow highlighter capped on the desk. He took the legal pad and began to add up the variable amounts. The grand total was staggering. It was more than he had even realized. He wrote the final number in clear block letters at the top of the page. 195,340.22. He stared at the number, nearly $200,000, 3 times his annual salary, poured into a business that had publicly, formally, and brutally disowned him. He felt a fresh wave of cold anger wash over him, but it was clarifying. This stack of papers, this undeniable documented proof, was his power. They had underestimated him. They saw him as a simple mechanic, a greasy tools guy, who was good for a check but not for a conversation. They had no idea that his entire profession was built on documentation, procedure, and evidence. He treated every aircraft he worked on as a potential crime scene, documenting every step, every part, every torque value. He had, by habit and by training, created a perfect, unassailable case file against them. On Monday morning, he took a personal day from work. He didn't call Glenda to apologize. Instead, at 10 a.m., he walked into the downtown offices of Davies Financial Consulting. It wasn't a law firm, not yet. He wasn't ready for that. He needed a strategic overview. Mr. Davies had been recommended by a master chief at the base as a no-nonsense guy who understands military and government pay systems. Mr. Davies was a sharp, impeccably dressed black man in his late 60s. He listened intently as Nathan calmly and dispassionately laid out the entire situation without a trace of emotion in his voice. He explained the 3-year funding arrangement, the verbal agreement that it was a family asset, the lack of any legal contract, and the events of Saturday afternoon. He did not present the bank statements yet. He was testing the waters. When Nathan finished, Mr. Davies leaned back in his expensive-looking $2,000 leather chair. "So you've been the sole financial benefactor of this business for 3 years, to the tune of nearly $200,000, and your name is on none of the corporate paperwork." "That's correct," Nathan said, "and your wife and mother-in-law now claim sole ownership and have ejected you from the premises." "Correct." Mr. Davies steepled his fingers. "From a legal standpoint, recovering that money will be exceptionally difficult. Without a contract, the court will likely view those transfers as gifts. Expensive, foolish gifts, but gifts nonetheless." Nathan nodded. He had expected this. "I'm not interested in recovering the money, Mr. Davies. The money is gone. I've accepted that. What I am interested in is protecting my other assets, specifically the house." "The house is in both your names?" "Yes, but every single mortgage payment for the last 5 years has come directly from my personal checking account, into which only my Navy salary is deposited. My wife has not contributed a single dollar to the mortgage or the upkeep." Mr. Davies' eyes lit up with professional interest. "Do you have the documentation to prove that?" For the first time, Nathan allowed himself a small, cold smile. "I have every bank statement, every mortgage statement, and every receipt for every major repair right here in my briefcase." He opened his $89 leather alternative briefcase and laid the 2-inch stack of highlighted bank statements on the polished mahogany desk. Mr. Davies picked up the top page and looked at it. He whistled softly. "Mr. Johnson," he said, a new level of respect in his voice, "you've done the hard part. In the event of a divorce, this changes everything. This is a clear and compelling record of asset flow. While the business funds may be lost, your claim to the marital home is exceptionally strong. You've been paying for everything: the business, the house, the lifestyle. You have the proof. Nathan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. This was the confirmation he needed. His quiet, methodical nature, the very thing they had mocked, was his salvation. "So what is my next move?" Nathan asked. "Your next move," Mr. Davies said, leaning forward, "is to do nothing. You stop the bleeding. You cut off the supply. You have already accepted the money as a sunk cost, so sink it. Let the business stand on its own 2 feet, as they so proudly claim it does. See how long it stands." Nathan stood up and shook Mr. Davies' hand. The consultation cost him $300, the best money he had ever spent. He walked out of the office and into the Pensacola sunshine, his path suddenly, undeniably clear. He wasn't going to fight them. He wasn't going to sue them. He was simply going to stop, and he was going to let the natural laws of finance and consequences do the rest. The strike was not a dramatic confrontation. It was an act of profound and total silence. It occurred on Wednesday, the 1st of June, a day that dawned bright and humid. For the past 36 months, the first of the month had been a day of financial obligation for Nathan. It was the day he would log into his bank account and transfer $4,500 to Glenda's Bloom LLC. It was a ritual of sacrifice, but not this Wednesday. At 7:02 a.m., Nathan was not at his computer. He was in the cockpit of a T-45 Goshawk, running a pre-flight diagnostic on the avionics suite. The intricate dance of numbers and symbols on the multi-function display was a language he understood. It was logical. It was true. There was no room for lies in an aircraft cockpit. A lie could get people killed. In his old life, he now realized, the lies had just been killing him slowly. At 9:05 a.m., his phone, tucked away in a locker, buzzed with an incoming text message. It was from Ashanti. "Rent is due today. Did you send it?" The message was casual, almost an afterthought. The assumption of his compliance was total. Nathan did not see the message until his morning break at 10:15 a.m. He stood by his locker, sipping a cup of black coffee from a thermos. He read the text. He felt a flicker of the old obligation, the conditioned response to provide. But then he remembered Glenda's voice, sharp as a shard of glass. "Get out of my shop." He remembered Ashanti's silent, damning nod. The flicker of obligation died, replaced by a cold, still resolve. He put the phone back in his locker without replying. He went back to work. The silence from his end stretched across the morning. It was a void where a $4,500 transfer was supposed to be, and into that void, the panic began to creep. At 11:30 a.m., a second text arrived, this time from Glenda. It was more direct. "Nathan, the landlord just called. The rent hasn't been paid. Handle it." The words were a command, not a request. He was not a partner. He was a functionary. He read the message and felt nothing. He was simply an observer now. The afternoon brought the first signs of genuine alarm. At 2:00 p.m., his phone rang. It was Ashanti. He looked at the screen, at her picture. The two of them smiling on a beach at sunset, a photo from a happier time. He let the call go to voicemail. The message she left was laced with irritation. "Nathan, this isn't funny. Call me back. Mama is freaking out. The landlord is threatening late fees." The tone was still one of annoyance, as if he were a disobedient child, not a man who had been fundamentally betrayed. The real panic hit late in the afternoon. At 4:45 p.m., just as he was packing up to leave the base, his phone rang again. It was Glenda. He let it go to voicemail. He listened to the message as he walked across the vast parking lot to his truck. Her voice was no longer imperious. It was tight, high-pitched, and cracking at the edges. "Nathaniel? I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you are going to ruin my business. My reputation in this town is on the line. You will send that $4,500 right now. You will not do this to me. Do this to me." He shook his head. He wasn't doing anything to her. He was simply doing nothing. He was respecting her wishes. He was staying out of her shop, out of her business, completely. He drove home, and for the first time in days, he felt a sliver of something other than cold anger. It was a grim sense of control. He was no longer a victim of their whims. He was the one holding the switch, and he had turned it off. He walked into the house to find Ashanti pacing in the living room, her phone clutched in her hand. The moment she saw him, she descended on him. "There you are. Have you been ignoring my calls? What is wrong with you? Did you send the money?" she demanded, her voice a shriek. Nathan calmly set his lunchbox on the kitchen counter. He looked at her, his face unreadable, his heart rate steady. The time for playing dumb was over. It was time for the quiet truth. "No," he said. The single word fell into the room like a stone. "No? What do you mean, no?" she sputtered. "The rent, Nathan, the business." "Glenda told me to get out of her shop and not come back," he said, his voice as flat and cool as polished steel. "She said it was her business, not mine." He paused, letting the words hang in the air between them. He was using their own logic, their own declarations, as his shield and his weapon. "So," he continued, meeting her wide, uncomprehending eyes, "I'm respecting her wishes. I'm staying out of her business, all the way out." The dawning horror on Ashanti's face was a sight to behold. The color drained from her cheeks as the full implication of his words finally crashed down on her. The money wasn't just late, it wasn't coming. The man they had treated as an ATM had just closed his account. The foundation they had stood on so proudly, pretending it wasn't there, had just been removed. And they were in free fall. "You can't do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. It was no longer a command. It was a plea. "I'm not doing anything," he said, turning to walk toward the spare bedroom. "I'm just a guest, remember?" The consequences began to cascade almost immediately. A slow-motion demolition of the beautiful facade they had built. The structure of petals and promises, deprived of its invisible financial support, began to groan and shudder under its own weight. June. The default. The first week of the month was a storm of frantic, unanswered calls and texts. Nathan had blocked Glenda's number, but Ashanti's messages became a running commentary of their descent. June 2nd. The landlord is adding a $250 late fee. This is insane. June 5th. Mama used her personal credit card to buy roses for the Henderson wedding, but it was declined. June 8th. Where are you? Are you even living here anymore? June 10th. The landlord, a commercial property group that did not care about artistic visions or family drama, posted a 10-day pay or quit notice on the elegant glass door of the shop. It was printed on bright orange paper, impossible to miss. The public humiliation was immediate. Customers would walk up to the door, read the notice, and walk away, their faces a mixture of pity and gossip. Glenda, who valued her reputation above all else, was mortified. She and Ashanti scraped together about $2,000 from the shop's meager earnings and their own nearly maxed-out credit cards, but it wasn't enough to cover the $4,500 rent, let alone the now $500 in late fees. July. The unraveling. The 10-day notice expired. The landlord filed for a formal eviction. The legal process was slow, but it was relentless. Worse, the suppliers started to revolt. The Dutch flower importer, owed over $3,000 for tulips and freesias, cut off their credit line completely. The specialty vase company in Italy sent a threatening letter from their legal department. The local delivery service refused to take any more orders until their outstanding balance of $680 was paid. The shop, once a lush jungle of color and life, began to look sparse and sad. The expensive coolers were half empty. The arrangements they could make were smaller, using cheaper flowers. The magic was gone. Desperate, Glenda and Ashanti went to a local credit union to apply for a small business loan of $25,000. They dressed in their best clothes, Ashanti in a $400 DVF wrap dress, Glenda in an elegant but somber pantsuit. They presented their case to a loan officer, a practical man named Mr. Henderson. He looked at their business plan, which was full of flowery language but short on financial specifics. Then he looked at their bank statements for the last 2 years. He frowned, tapping a finger on the pages. "I'm confused," he said. "Your monthly expenses between rent, payroll, and cost of goods average around $8,000 to $10,000, but your documented revenue from sales only averages about $4,000. You've been operating at a 50% loss for 3 years straight. How have you stayed open?" Glenda and Ashanti exchanged a panicked look. They couldn't say, "My son-in-law was covering the shortfall." It would shatter their self-made women narrative. "We've had a private investor," Glenda mumbled, the lie tasting like poison. "I see," Mr. Henderson said, his face impassive. "And is this investor still involved?" The silence in the small office was deafening. "Your loan application is denied," he said, closing the folder. "This business is not solvent. It never has been." They walked out of the bank into the sweltering July heat, the reality of their situation finally crushingly clear. They weren't businesswomen. They were the managers of a very expensive long-term hobby, and their patron had just walked away. August, the personal fallout. The eviction was finalized. They were given 30 days to vacate the premises. The news spread through the tight-knit East Hill community like wildfire. Meanwhile, the war at home had entered its final quiet phase. Nathan had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. He had hired a lawyer, a woman who specialized in complex asset division. Armed with Nathan's meticulous records, she had sent a proposal to Ashanti's newly hired and much less expensive attorney. The offer was brutal in its simplicity. Nathan would keep the house in Cordova Park, assuming the full mortgage himself. In exchange, he would not pursue Ashanti for her half of the marital debt they had technically incurred. The debt that was, in reality, the money he had poured into her mother's shop. Ashanti's lawyer, seeing the mountain of evidence Nathan's team had, every bank statement, every mortgage payment, every canceled check, advised her to take the deal immediately. Fighting it would be costly and almost certainly futile. Ashanti's text to Nathan changed from anger to pleading. "Baby, we can fix this. I was wrong. I'm so sorry. Please don't do this. I talked to Mama. She's sorry too. She was just stressed. Please, Nathan. The shop is all she has. Don't take my home too." He read the messages, but the words were meaningless. They were the desperate pleas of someone whose comfortable life was collapsing, not the genuine remorse of someone who understood the depth of her betrayal. He had already moved his things permanently into the spare room. The house was no longer a home. It was a contested asset, and he was determined to keep it. September and October, the end. A hand-painted sign, crude and heartbreaking, appeared in the window of Petals and Promises. Everything must go, closing sale. The elegant, custom-made $3,000 sign with the shop's logo had been taken down. It was replaced by garish signs made from cheap poster board. For 2 weeks, Glenda and Ashanti sold off everything. The remaining flowers, the vases, not the Italian ones, which had never been ordered, the ribbons, the furniture, the coolers. They got pennies on the dollar. The $8,000 refrigeration unit sold for $1,500. The custom-built front counter, a $4,000 expense, went for $500. It was a public and painful liquidation of their dream. On October 15th, 4.5 months after Nathan had walked out the door, the shop closed for good. The doors were locked, the windows were papered over. The total cost of the collapse was staggering. There was the $195,340 Nathan had invested, now gone forever. There was the $25,000 penalty Glenda was being sued for breaking her 5-year commercial lease. There was over $12,000 in defaulted supplier contracts that would haunt her credit for years. And there was the immeasurable cost of her shattered pride and reputation. Ashanti moved out of the Cordova Park house and into her mother's small rented apartment across town. Their combined worlds had shrunk to fit into 2 bedrooms, filled with the ghosts of unpaid bills and broken promises. The mother-daughter duo who had graced the pages of a magazine were now just 2 women who had overestimated their own abilities and, more importantly, underestimated the quiet mechanic they had thrown away. 1 year later, the Florida sun streamed through the massive open doors of an aircraft hangar at NAS Pensacola, illuminating the fine dust motes dancing in the air. The smell of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid was the same, but for Nathan, the world was entirely different. He stood on a small makeshift stage, a podium in front of him, looking out at a small crowd of young recruits, seasoned officers, and fellow civilian mechanics. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was a philanthropist. "Real wealth isn't about what you own," he said, his voice clear and steady, amplified by a small microphone. "It's not about expensive things or fancy storefronts. Real wealth is about what you build. And the best things you can build are skills, character, and other people." He paused, looking at the face of a young woman in the front row, her eyes wide with hope. She was the first recipient of the Phoenix Scholarship, a $10,000 grant he had established. He had created the fund using the money he was no longer pouring into a failing flower shop. The scholarship was designed to help young men and women from underprivileged backgrounds enter aviation trade programs. He was investing not in a dream made of petals and lies, but in futures forged of steel and skill. "This scholarship," he continued, "is for the builders, the fixers, the people who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty, the people who understand that true value lies in making something work, in making it safe, in making it fly." He presented the oversized check to the young woman, and the hangar erupted in applause. He shook her hand, and in her firm, grateful grip, he felt a sense of purpose, more profound than any he had ever known. He had kept the house in Cordova Park. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago. It was quiet now. The expensive furniture Ashanti had picked out was mostly gone, sold off, and replaced with simpler, more functional pieces that he liked. The Louis Vuitton purse and the Michael Kors dresses were ghosts of a life that no longer existed. The house was his, truly his, and the silence was no longer empty. It was peaceful. He never saw Glenda again. He heard through the grapevine that she had taken a job at a grocery store floral department to pay her debts. He saw Ashanti once, across a crowded supermarket. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. He saw in her gaze a universe of regret. He gave her a small, polite nod, not of forgiveness, but of acknowledgement, and continued on with his shopping. He felt no anger, no bitterness. He felt nothing at all. They were a part of his past, a closed chapter, a lesson learned. The true measure of his new life was not in the hangar or the house, but on the water. On a Saturday afternoon, exactly a year and a half after he had been thrown out of the shop, he was not surrounded by flowers. He was on his small, 18-foot fishing boat, a used vessel he'd bought for $7,000, and lovingly restored himself. The engine purred quietly as he drifted just off the coast of Perdido Key. The sun was a fiery orange ball sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of purple and gold. He baited his hook, the familiar methodical movements calming his soul. He cast his line, the nylon singing as it flew through the air, the lead sinker making a satisfying plunk as it hit the water. He leaned back in his seat, a cold drink in the cup holder, the gentle sea breeze on his face. He wasn't thinking about lost money or broken promises. He was thinking about the tide, the position of the sun, and the feeling of a fish on the line. He was present. He was at peace. He was free. The world was vast and full of possibility, and he was no longer anchored to someone else's fragile, expensive dream. He was the captain of his own small boat, sailing into a sunset that was all his own. True wealth isn't something you can buy or be given. It's something you build within yourself. It's the strength to walk away from what's broken and the wisdom to invest in what is real and true. Nathan lost a fortune, but he found himself. What do you think is the most valuable thing a person can build? Share your thoughts with our community below. Thank you for being a part of the Love Beyond Pride family, where we believe that the best revenge is a life well and truly lived.